but they are beautifully behaved and loving kids.
So I'm going to stitch an extended clip of Dr. Dobson's seminar teaching from the 70s. This clip comes to us from D.L. Mayfield's account. To my understanding, they are doing a similar book project, diving deep into the history of evangelical parenting with a particular focus on Dr. Dobson, his history, his influence, and the political impact of his teaching. So you can check out their account. But let's have a look at this clip and keep your eyes out for lies Christian parents believe.
I flew into an airport in Denver and met them for the first time. And by the time I walked out of the airport, I was holding hands with one of them. The other one has his arms around my neck, and they're just that kind of kids.
Earlier in the video, Dobson has presented an idea that the ideal child is loving and obedient. And here he reinforces this, kind of saying that this is how children should behave. After meeting a stranger, they should be affectionate with the stranger and endearing to them, and that's a model child. So I just want to observe that's being presented as a subtle ideal for a child's behavior and an expectation that's what good children do.
And the parents have done a great job of balancing love and control.
If you'll remember, the original cover copy of Dare to Discipline shows almost a teeter-totter with love and control balanced opposite each other. So he's clearly referencing that tagline, and it's interesting to think about what it means that a generation of parents was told their job was to control their children and to try and balance out that control with love.
But they get tested too. And the father was telling me that they were in a restaurant, and the 5-year-old was just suddenly bugging everybody and asking who's in charge here.
This is actually a pretty common tactic in Christian parenting teaching, where you'll see not only is this presented as a joke, kind of like with a wink and a nod, this moment with a child, but the child is being spoken for. Their actions are being interpreted. Like, of course, we only get Dobson's telling of this, so who knows what was going on. Possibly developmentally appropriate behavior for a child in a restaurant, but regardless, it's being interpreted as testing the parents, as asking who's in charge here. See this in the preceding words where he says that they're being tested. So this is already setting up an ordinary everyday interaction is always going to be fraught with a potential for an adversarial relationship. It's a power struggle.
It was so clear that he wanted to know. And he put his fingers in the water and splashed it in his sister's face. He was being sassy to his mother. He was just looking for ways to defy authority.
Again, we see a child's actions being interpreted through the lens of adversarial relationship, and in this case, through the lens entirely of, is this child defying parental authority? Now think of this in contrast with what's being presented as the ideal. Loving, affectionate children versus a child who is defying authority. There's either extreme, it's either or in this context.
And finally the father had it. He'd had enough. He reached the action line.
I'm not sure if reaching the action line is something common in Dobson's teaching, but the father has had enough. That's the motivation. Again, it is parent-centric, looking at what the father's willing to tolerate about what is being perceived as defying parental authority. There isn't capacity to consider the child's needs. And as we've talked about before, child development is functionally absent from most of this literature. So there's no capacity to think about a child's needs in that moment, only that the lens of defying parental authority.
He took the boy by the arm and he marched him out of the door of the cafeteria and out into a parking lot and behind a car where he proceeded to give him the spanking he'd been begging for.
Here we have again the sideways joking about, in this case, a child about to receive corporal punishment, public shaming, and the language of what he has been begging for really enables things to escalate to abusive proportions, because it is framing the child as the antagonist and saying, well, he's been begging for this all along. This is what he really wants and what he really needs. You combine this with a parent who feels like they've had it, and you can get to some very dangerous territory.
There was a lady in the restaurant who watched all this happen and became very indignant.
that even adjusting for historical standards where perhaps corporal punishment was more accepted societally, if Dobson's account is to be believed, a woman in the 70s was indignant witnessing what was going on. This was societally inappropriate for that day. Dobson's going to frame her as an antagonist as well and make her the butt of the joke along with the child.
And she got up and she marched out of the restroom and out into the parking lot and into their faces and shook her finger in the father's, that boy go if you call the police.
All I can say is bless this woman, whoever she was. It is difficult and complicated to intervene in situations where a child is being harmed. But as a community, we do have responsibilities to keep children safe.
And a 5-year-old who had been jumping up and down and crying immediately stopped crying and looked up at his dad and says, "What's wrong with that woman, Dad?"
And here we have the punchline of the joke. I mean, if Dobson's to be believed with this story, he was well known for rehearsing, as good speakers often do, rehearsing his stories, rehearsing his talks. So if he's to be believed in accurately reporting this moment of punishment for a child, public shame, and conflict with another adult attempting to intervene becomes a joke and a collective eye roll, because we all know how absurd it would be for a parent, for an adult to object to this kind of treatment. And in fact, again, the child is going to be framed as wanting the spanking, being glad for this method of punishment. And DL's response, if you see in the text, I think is spot on. Christian parents are some of the last holdouts for corporal punishment. It's often a hill they want to die on. I have a couple videos on why mandated spanking is not exegetically or hermeneutically supportable, but for a whole host of reasons, Christian parents will still advocate for this. And this became a hallmark. You know, Dobson paved the way for the other parenting empires that came after him, and this became a staple. It's almost an unquestioned given in the vast majority of popular Christian parenting teaching.
Children understand. They understand that concept. It is a deliberate, almost a willful thing, a conscious thing to test you to that point. And wherever you draw the line, that's how far they'll take you.
Here we have an iconic moment where we see parents being told their children will constantly be in an adversarial relationship with them, that the child's goal will always be to test the parent no matter how far. So obviously this can be on a sliding scale that can be raised to exponential proportions, because it's up to the parent to determine the child's motivations, what they're testing, and when the parent has had it to respond.